Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrea DeHaan. I am the Outreach Coordinator for the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, and we are excited to have you here today for what is our final presentation in the pre-law series for spring 2021. And I'm joined today by my co-host, Dan Matthews, pre-law advisor and advisor over a number of areas in our college. A few housekeeping issues before we get to today's guest. I do want to remind you that while we can't see you directly on screen, we would still love to hear from you. So if you would like to use the chat feature to either say hello or introduce yourself, or as well as to communicate any technical issues to me, feel free to do so. And you'll also notice at the bottom of your screen the Q&A feature. That's where you can ask questions of our guest. And don't be shy. If something comes to mind while our guest today is speaking, please go ahead and drop your question in the Q&A box, and we will make time for them at the conclusion of our presentation. You can also find information normally about upcoming presentations, but as this week is our final week of presentations in CHAS, this will be a good link for you to visit if you want to go back and review anything that you missed this semester. And so without further ado, I'd like to tell you a little bit about today's guest, Trystan Smith, before I turn the time over to him. Trystan is the managing attorney at State Farm's Claim Litigation Counsel office, Trystan Smith and Associates, in Salt Lake City, where he focuses his practice on trial work. Trystan represents State Farm and its insureds throughout Utah's state and federal courts. A trial lawyer with over 20 years of experience, Trystan is an emeritus member of the Utah Supreme Court's Advisory Committee on the Rules of Civil Procedure. He is past president of the Salt Lake County Bar Association and past president of the Utah Minority Bar Association. He is a member of the Dean's Diversity Council at the S.J. Quinney College of Law, a member of the Utah Center for Legal Inclusion, a master of the bench of the Sutherland II Inns of Court, and a fellow of the American Bar Foundation. He earned his degree in political science from Utah State in 1994 and also holds a JD from the S.J. Quinney College of Law. Trystan, we are thrilled to have you here today and excited to hear from an attorney, especially one working in the areas of trial and actually, finding time normally when there's not a pandemic on to spend time in the courtroom. And I know that our participants today are going to be excited to hear about your experiences. So I would love to just turn the time over to you, and Dan and I will, interject as needed with questions, or we'll get to those questions at the end. So welcome, Trystan.
Oh, thank you, Andrea, and Dan. Andrea, thank you for inviting me to be here today. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak to all of you today. I want to tell you a little bit about myself first, and then what I'd like to do in our 30 to 40 minutes that I have to speak, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the lessons I've learned in the last 25 years from graduating from Utah State and practicing law here in the state of Utah. And then for the last 15, 20 minutes, we've reserved time for questions and to talk about any topics, either contemporary topics, otherwise other topics that you'd like to discuss. And as Andrea mentioned, if there are questions in between that time, I'm happy to engage in discussing those questions during the next 30 to 40 minutes. But as I mentioned, I'd like to talk about a few of the lessons learned, both in the process of applying to law school, going to law school, graduating, and practicing, and in doing so, go through a couple of personal stories and anecdotes that have helped me in my process in my professional career, and tell you a little bit about myself, my background, and the process that I took, the course that I took to get to where I am today. First, let me tell you a little bit about my background. I'm a Utah native. I grew up in Roy, Utah. I attended Utah State from 1990 to 1994. I was a pre-law major with a minor in philosophy. And at the time, the College of Humanities had a actual pre-law major, and it was a course that major that you really took your senior year. that involved 5 courses, 2 of which were con law courses, a legislative process course, an administrative law course, and I believe 1 other course that you took for that specific pre-law major. And I also minored in philosophy. Really, it was an interest, but really the focus in philosophy was for the Lsat, for the deductive logic portion of that Lsat exam, knowing that I intended to go to law school. After graduating from Utah State, I was admitted to the then University of Utah College of Law, now the S.J. Quinney College of Law. That was in 1994. And from then, graduated in 1997 and went out and started in private practice and have been in private practice ever since. About 2000 and that was the year 2000 that I was in a small firm from 97 to 2000, mid-sized firm. And from 2000 until 2011, I practiced at Snow Christensen in Martineau. Snow Christensen in Martineau is considered a large firm, a full service law firm in downtown Salt Lake, where I was a shareholder for 5 or 6 years. And in 2011, I was asked to come and manage and run State Farm's Claim Litigation Counsel office. State Farm's referred to it as a CLC office. There's 39 of these offices around the country. They're the trial litigation office for State Farm, where we handle the legal work for all of State Farm insureds and for first party direct claims against the company State Farm for all the state of Utah. I help manage 5 lawyers and 3 paralegals and 6 other staff members. And we handle currently almost 400, almost 500 cases filed throughout the state from Logan to St. George. And all we do is State Farm work there. And most of all the work we do is trial work. I've been trying cases, civil cases, automobile cases, personal injury cases, product liability cases, premise liability cases, civil litigation for most of the past 20 years. My time at Snow Christensen was very beneficial for me. Snow Christensen in Martineau is one of the top trial firms in the state. And there I was able to learn how to handle both defend and prosecute commercial cases and white collar criminal cases. I spent my time handling, well, probably 75% civil cases and defense, and 25% white collar criminal cases while I was at Snow Christensen in Martineau. Around the year 2005, I was a shareholder at Snow Christensen. And at the time, I was the first African-American shareholder in a Utah law firm. That was in 2005. And as far as I'm aware, the only African-American shareholder in a Utah law firm at that time. So that's a little bit about me. I wanted to just briefly tell you about what I'm doing and the work that I'm doing. Mainly, the other 5 lawyers in my office handle the cases that we have. I am managing most of that, directing, organizing most of that litigation, and I have a reduced caseload, but for the most part, the folks in my office are trial lawyers, and that includes the work that I've done in my past, and I consider myself and have always been a trial lawyer, and it's a stressful profession, but it's very rewarding. And I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the lessons I've learned as a trial lawyer, and some of the pitfalls of the legal career, and then some of the success stories, some of the things that have really made my career very rewarding. So for those of you I understand that may be considering a career in the law, or those of you that may have already graduated and or are about to graduate and have been admitted into law school, I wanted to tell you a personal story about my journey. The 2 years before graduating, when I was planning to get into law school, and how I approached that time. For me, I was attracted to the law from the societal benefits that I saw a lawyer could do. I felt that being a lawyer would allow me to help people, and that's what I wanted to do with my profession. And at that time, growing up, I had never met a practicing lawyer. I had never met a lawyer, period. I had no experience with the law, and I had no experience with lawyers. And so I understood what lawyers did, but I really didn't have a sense for what it would take from real experience, what it would take to apply to law school, be a successful law student, and to be a successful practicing lawyer. The first lawyer that I ever met was a professor at Utah State, who some of you may have known, but has now since retired, is Press Thomas, who taught many of the pre-law classes in the 80s and early 90s. And he was taking those pre-law courses my senior year. That was the first time I ever met. He was the first lawyer I ever met. And that was my first experience really dealing with the law. I had Con Law 1 class with Press Thomas and Con Law 2 class with him. And I didn't know really if I could do it. I was had anxiety. I was fearful. I was lacked confidence, and I didn't know if this was something that would really fit my skill set. I knew that I wanted to pursue it, but I didn't know if I had the mental ability to take on that challenge of the Socratic method and going through law school. And at the time, Press Thomas what he was trying to do in those classes was prepare us for what you would take, what you would see as a first-year law student. So it was the first opportunity where I would actually be involved in the class and would have to prepare daily and be subject to questions using the Socratic method in Con Law 1 class. And so that was a very stressful time for me. And I wasn't sure that I was being successful and I was doing the things that I needed to do. And so I really just sweated that class. At the time, we were on quarters all quarter. I spent hours and hours reading every day for that class, and it took, that class took more time than any class that I had. And when the time came to take, there was just one exam at the end of just like in law school, one exam at the end of the quarter, nothing else, and your entire grade is based upon that one exam. And when the time came for the one exam at the end of the quarter, I spent, I don't know how many hours studying for it, but it was going to be like sometimes your exams will be in law school. Most of your exams will be open book exams, and the materials that you have to prepare for you would have had to prepare an outline of the materials that you read and learned in class, and you could bring that outline with you for your exam. And so with, at that point, my first experience with that type of exam, I was trying to prepare and I didn't know what I was doing and just tried to do the best I could. And I didn't know if I was going to be successful or not, but I decided, well, I'm going to use the best method I could to prepare for this exam and be able to access the information in the short time period that he allowed us to finish the exam quickly. And so I prepared an outline and I put little sticky tabs on the different subjects like an index, and I named each subject or each area on the sticky tab. And I brought that outline with me for the exam. And I sat in my normal seat in Old Main and in the normal classroom where there were probably only 20 students in the class. And it was a hyper competitive environment. All of us wanted to go to law school. All of us were overachievers. And I sat down and I brought my outline out and I thought, well, this is an ingenious idea and everybody's going to have the same thing or something similar. And nobody had anything similar to what I was at. No one had it. No one had an outline. No one had any type of tabs or stickies or way of organizing their materials. Everyone else was doing something completely different. And at the time I was sitting down to do that exam at the beginning of it, I felt like just breaking down. I just thought, I'm an idiot. I don't know what I was thinking. This isn't going to work. I'm not going to be able to find what I needed. Nobody else is doing what I'm doing. They all have some other system to figure out where the material is. I'm going to fail. I'm not going to go to law school. I'm going to be a miserable failure. And, you know, my whole career is over. And I just went through this whole anxiety attack. I felt like I was going to break down in tears, all within a 10-minute period at the beginning of this exam. And I just froze and didn't do anything. But then, you know, I finally relaxed, calmed down, and decided I was going to use the outline that I had and use the tabs and use the system that I created. And I finished the exam. So end of quarter, a couple of weeks go by, and you know, we get our exam results, and I'm a nervous wreck, and you know, and I'm thinking that based upon the results of this Con Law 1 class, I'm going to decide whether I'm going to continue along this path and try to go to law school, or I got to rethink what I'm doing. And to my surprise, Press Thomas, the only lawyer I know, writes a little note on my in a yellow sticky, writes a little note on my exam, and he says 90 A grade, outstanding, exclamation point. And I couldn't have been happier. And I felt like a whole weight had been lifted from my, you know, a whole weight had been lifted off my shoulders. And just to get that type of acclamation from him, and to get something from him that said that, you know, not only did I do well on the exam, but that made me feel like he thought I could be a law student, that I could be a lawyer. I kept that little yellow sticky note that said outstanding with an exclamation point. You know, my wife thinks it's really nerdy, but I kept that all through law school. I even have it till this day. I still have it because it just told me the lesson. It gave me the lesson of, you know, you have to believe in yourself. You have to believe in your ability. And there's going to be times when you're on this journey, you're going to be challenged, you're going to be taxed, people are going to doubt you, and they're going to challenge you. But you have to believe in yourself and believe in your ability. And you know, that was really the jumping off point for me, and it happened, you know, that semester, that quarter in junior year in Old Main with Russ Thomas. And he really gave me that confidence. That one quarter, that one class gave me that confidence to do what I needed to do. So believe in yourself is one lesson that I learned, and I learned it right there at Utah State. The other lesson that I think that has been important for me, and I've learned it the hard way, is don't let other people tell you what you can and can't do, and don't limit yourself. Don't put self limitations on yourself. And people you'll hear, you do it yourself. You'll hear people do this all the time, is they'll say, I can't do this, or I won't do this, or I don't feel as if I can do this, this course, this program, whatever it may be. Or you'll hear people tell you, I don't know if you're able to do this, or you should do something different. But don't let people tell you you can't do something. When I was deciding I wanted to go to law school, and there was obviously many options of different law schools and different tiers, I decided my year, the junior year, between the junior and senior year at Utah State, that I needed to take an Lsat preparatory course. And all of you are probably familiar with those courses, and it may be different now, but at the time, you could buy books and take those courses and do them on your own, or you could take a live in-person class. And that's what I chose to do. And a number of people did the same thing. And people from universities across the state decided to take this in-person class, and it was held at the University of Utah at the time. So it required some effort to drive to the University of Utah and take that class. It was an evening class. And there was the person that taught the class was a working lawyer downtown, and he worked at this big kind of posh white glove law firm, and it had marble all over, and marble stairways, and glass, and big offices, and it was just a very expensive looking place. And had this huge conference room with this huge chandelier, and it was just, it was like the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. And it was this, just looked like a place like you just plucked it out of Washington, D.C. and put it in downtown Salt Lake. And the urban legend was that they were paying brand new law clerks $5,000 a month to work there. And $5,000 a month back in 1993 was a lot of money. That was a lot of money, especially for someone that just had an undergrad degree. That was a lot of money. And the starting salaries were somewhere in the mid 70s. So that was somewhere, if you thought about that at the time, that was coming from where we were coming from to that, you thought like you were rich, right? And so there was a lot of pressure, at least I felt a lot of pressure to get a good score on the Lsat and be successful in law school, and to be at a place like this. And as I was there in the Lsat class, and the person that taught the class at times would let us come to his law firm. That's how I got to know the law firm. And he would show us around, and we'd have the class in the conference room, the main conference room of his law firm. He would talk about Lsat scores and grades and extracurricular activities. And one of the things that he would say was how difficult it would be to be hired at his law firm, because he only accepted the cream of the crop law student, and you had to have the top 10% of the class. And he would also talk about how difficult it would be to be admitted into certain law schools based upon his experience. And in particular, to be admitted into the University of Utah or BYU at the time, and his experience in those situations because he taught the Lsat class and so on and so forth. And so one of the things that he told me was, well, based upon your background and your GPA and your extracurriculars and where I think you may score on your LSAT, I'm not sure that you'll be able to, you'll be admitted into law school. You may be waitlisted. And at the time, I was really upset with that. And I thought, what does he know? How does he know what's going to happen to me in law school? How does he know what I'm going to score? How does he know what a law school is going to do or view? But that was one person in my mind who was doubting my ability to be a lawyer, to be admitted in law school, to be in those places. And I thought to myself, I'll never be and I'll never be hired by a law firm like this. I'll never work in a place like this that was this white glove law firm downtown Salt Lake who pay their new lawyers, this amount of money per year. That's just not a place that would want me. And that's not a place that would fit for me. So fast forward to the following year, of course, I do get admitted into law school. And fast forward, let's see, 4 years after law school, the same person, same lawyer that was teaching the Lsat class, the same law firm that I was in learning the Lsat class ends up being Snow Christensen and Martineau, the same firm that I end up being hired, and the same firm that I end up being a partner working at. And the same lawyer that taught the Lsat class ends up being one of my mentors at Snow Christensen and one of the lawyers that I work with most often at Snow Christensen. So if I had a lesson to pass on to you, a lesson learned is don't listen to what other people say about you and your career, and don't put limits on yourself because you don't know what the future holds. Keep your head down and keep working hard because you don't know what's there for you in the future. The other lesson that I would impart to you is the importance of friendships, allegiances, and allies. And this is something that I wish I would have really internalized and acknowledged more closely earlier in my life. And what I mean by that is there were a few people there at Utah State that I really I really have to credit for my success, and both my success when I initially came to Utah State, my success while I was there, and my success after. And Ross Peterson, who some of you may know, who I don't know if he's still actively teaching, but I know has been a mentor and counselor and guided many people there at Utah State. He did that for me when I was there at Utah State. And one of the things that he used to always tell us and tell me and tell the students was that, and this is really the first time I heard this, was there from Ross, is that no one gets through school, no one gets through their professional career alone, that you can't do this successfully alone, that you need allies, you need friends, you need supporters to be successful. And that was an important lesson for me to understand and to learn, is that you may think, and I thought at the time, that meritocracy was always going to bring the best person and the best candidate to the top, and ideally it should, but in the real world and practically, that's not how the real world works. And you need someone in the room to be a supporter for you. You need someone to give you the insight about how things work. And you need an ally or allies to help you through school and the admission process and law school and getting into law firms and the law firm environment. And there was another supporter and faculty member at Utah State. He was the director of the Multicultural Affairs office at the time. His name was Clifton Wilkes, and he's since passed away. But he was very instrumental in my coming to Utah State, recruiting me to come to Utah State, but also my success while I was there at Utah State. And again, he was an ally for me and for others while I was there, and was important to me in the success of my career. He was an example for me, a positive example of a professional. And he also provided me and lended me support, and I needed it, both academically, finding jobs, and getting into law school. So in short, allies, allegiances, friendships, all of those are important. And if I had any advice to give you, is to maintain and look for and create those allegiances and allies as best as possible. I see that we're about at 30 minutes. I have a couple other topics that I'm happy to discuss with you, but I'm going to leave some time for questions, and if we have a lull in the questions, then I can go over a couple of other topics that I have for you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Tristan. And I should mention that since you mentioned him, Ross Peterson is actually joining us today in our audience. So I'm sure he'll be pleased to hear the things you've had to say about him. He really has made a huge impact on so many of our students' lives. And Dan, I will turn the time over to you to start with some of those questions. And then, as Tristan said, he may have additional things to add.
Okay, yeah, the first question actually comes from Ross. It said, are you still engaged with the Martin Luther King Commission, or was that a temporary volunteer assignment? Also, please talk about your efforts to get Utah to accept the Martin Luther King holiday.
Yes, thanks, Ross, and hello. So I am not a member of the commission anymore. I was a commission member for about 5 years, and then I was the chair of the commission for a year. Ross is mentioning the commission's efforts to have the holiday's name changed from the Human Rights Day to the MLK, Martin Luther King Day. I wasn't directly involved with that, but for some of you that may not be aware of how that proceeded, just to circle back and give a little bit of background. Most every state in the union, except for Utah, had acknowledged Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday as a national or the state holiday, and also the national holiday by his name. Utah, I believe, was the last state to do so before they, by legislation or by governor's declaration, acknowledged MLK Day as MLK Day. It was known as Human Rights Day here in the state of Utah. And part of the issue was that MLK Day landed on the first day of the legislative session here, the 45-day legislative session. And so there are a number of instrumental community members. Reverend Davis, and I'm going to leave names out if I start giving names, France Davis and others, including the MLK Commission, who lobbied for multiple years, the legislature, one, to change the date in which the first day of the legislature would start, and also to change the name of the holiday from Human Rights Day to Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. And that has now happened. And, you know, it should have happened a long time before, but that has now happened. And Forrest Crawford, Reverend Davis, and others who were instrumental in doing that work, and many members of the Martin Luther King Commission were involved in that process. I was very fortunate to be asked to work with that, and that's one of the benefits of being in this role. And you know, one of the obligations that you have as a lawyer is to lend, you know, your education and ability to these type of public service initiatives.
We have another question. It says, what is your favorite thing about being a lawyer? And what about your career made going to law school worth it?
Favorite thing about being a lawyer? This doesn't happen often, unfortunately, but it does happen. There will be times in your career where you really feel as if you have affected a person's life and improved their life for the better with the work that you've done as a lawyer. And let me give you an example. And you could fill in the facts in any different way, but for example, you could be defending a client in a case involving a preliminary injunction and declaratory action where a large company is asking that the client should be enforced with a non-compete provision, and the small business that he or she has started and grown should be dissolved because it violates the non-compete agreement that he or she has previously signed. And this is their entire livelihood, and they've invested their nest egg into this business. And if you lose, then this person is out of work, and they've lost their business, and they're unable to do their profession for 2 or 3 years. And their fate is in your hands, not entirely, but mostly. And so if you're successful in that action and you're able to give them a kickstart into their profession, then they're able to start and grow their own individual business, and you can see them live that life and pursue their dream over the next 20 years. I mean, that can be very rewarding if you're able to do that type of thing. There are many examples that you'll see, you can put in different cases, but that is a very direct effect that you could have on someone in their life, in their family's life. What was the second part of the question?
Now, what about your career made going to law school worth it?
What about my career made going to law school worth it? Going to law school, at the time, you feel as if, and this was I think most people have this feeling, you feel as if it will never end. those 3 years feel like 10 years. But the monetary investment and the 3-year investment, if you had to, it's like, this is a poor example, but perhaps it'll help illustrate it. It's like buying a mansion, but only paying $10,000 for it. You still got the mansion, and the mansion ends up being, it's like, I use this example, like Jerry Jones ended up, I think he bought the Dallas Cowboys for $500,000, but now the Dallas Cowboys are worth $2 billion. He had to pay $500,000 for it when he bought it, but he has an investment now worth $2 billion. I had to spend at the time what I thought was a whole lot of money, and 3 years of my life dedicated to law school. But being a lawyer has meant so much to me and my family. It's allowed me to travel around the country. It's allowed me to go to different countries. It's allowed me to open up so many avenues and allowed me to meet so many people. And I still have freedom. I've graduated at 25. I'm 49 now. I can pretty much do whatever I feel like I want to do. And if I decided to do that, I could teach, I could continue to practice, I could go into open my own business, I could go into my own practice. I have lots of options for the second half of my career because of that investment that I made 25 plus years ago.
I actually have one that I get asked quite often by students. And the first thing I hear out of their mouth is, I don't want to be a litigator. Where you do a lot of litigation and you appear a lot in court, things like that. What would you say to somebody like that? What are the things you like about it? What are the stresses that you deal with?
What I first would say is you really don't know what it's going to involve until you do it. And so I hear people say that in law school and before they go to law school a lot, and you really don't know. You really have no idea until you're actually doing it. There's no way to know what you want to do and what you don't want to do until you spend some significant time invested in doing it. Because what I'd say to folks is that the type of law and whether litigation, transaction, or counseling, which is pretty much the three main areas if you're going to be practicing. Either you're a transactional lawyer, you're counseling folks on separate types of law, you're in litigation, or you're a trial lawyer. Your personality is going to fit either one of those 3 or 4 categories. And so what I would say is that that's going to find you more than you go searching it. And so you're going to do a certain type of work and quickly going to see, I don't like that, or I do like it. And you're going to then naturally just drift to that area of the law more than you would others, and just by a process of elimination, find what you like. So I'd say try as many things as you can early on in your career, and then you'll really find what your niche is in 3 or 4 years.
We just got a couple new ones in. Yeah, the first one's interesting because we've heard some different opinions on this over the year. It says, I have heard from other lawyers that where you go to law school depends on where you practice. Is that entirely true, or does it depend on what kind of law you practice? I'm interested in law school, but I don't want to be, in a sense, trapped in a state.
Yeah, I think there are different opinions on that. It certainly is helpful if you go to law school where you intend to practice. One, because you'll be more familiar with the substantive and procedural law in that state if you attend law school in that state. Two is the connections, both from the alumni, your fellow graduate, your fellow law school graduates, and the connection to the law school when you get out of law school and be able to go back to that same law school and for assistance, support, etc. But with that said, if you go to law school in a certain state and then immediately within a year or two travel back to your home state or to the state that you plan to live in and then take the bar there before you really start practicing and just really envelop yourself into that state and start your connections immediately after graduating from law school, then I think you'll be fine and it really won't hurt where you go. So it may take a little more adjusting, it may take more networking, but you're still going to be able to develop your practice the way you want it.
Okay, we had another one just come in. It says, what was the best thing you did to prepare for law school? Was it the variety of classes you took in undergrad, your in-person Lsat prep course, etc.?
What was the best thing? I would say the best thing would be to take the LSAT preparatory courses are important to the extent of getting into the highest rated law school that you wanted to get into. In terms of succeeding as a lawyer and being successful in law school, the most important skill is writing. That's what you do as a lawyer. You know, that is really what distinguishes a good lawyer from a bad lawyer from a superb lawyer, is written, writing, and oral communication. And the real secret, I believe, from just a competent lawyer and the superstar lawyers that you see is folks that understand people and have extreme emotional intelligence and that can really connect with everyone, that can connect with presidents and senators and judges and lawyers, but can connect with the person that works at the gas station and the person that sells your groceries. That's really the successful lawyer. The really superior lawyer is the one that has that emotional intelligence, knows how to help people and work with their clients. And that's a skill that I think law schools are getting better at acknowledging and teaching. But that really is a skill that law firms and hiring lawyers are looking for, because they're going to see a stack of resumes and a stack of people that have very similar academic backgrounds from undergrad and from law school, and they're going to look very, very similar on paper. But what they want to look for are the intangibles, the leadership skills, the social abilities, emotional intelligence. So getting back to answering your question, I think the LSAT and like certain courses and those type of things, I think of those are more as tools, right? The building blocks to being successful as a lawyer are these skills, the writing skills, the emotional intelligence, and those skills are what's really important.
Let's see, we had one more come in. Besides focusing on GPA and Lsat scores, are law schools looking for other things in admission applicants?
I do think law schools are looking for, they're looking for public service. They're looking for leadership skills. They're looking for they're looking for what makes you different than the person next to you in the classroom. So did you, in order to get to your GPA and to your LSAT, were you working 30 hours a week? Were you working part-time? What were you doing that may be different than the normal student was doing in their four-year journey in undergrad? They're looking at your background. They're looking at your work experience. One thing that you don't understand, you don't see when you're doing this process is like a lot of the law school graduates have been out working and have professional careers. Then they end up putting aside or making law school their second professional career when they're in law school. And so when I was one of those people that just went straight 4 years and then right into law school. So when you're 22 and you go to law school, you're the youngest person there by far, right? You're 21, 22, you are the youngest person at the law school. And most of the people there, the median age may be 29, 28. And so the people there already have a career or careers that they've decided, they've worked a little, they decide they want to do something different. And so they're looking for people that have those type of different skills. It may be that, they may have a mixture of blended skills that they bring that to law school, and then they want to use those blended skills while they're practicing. Different experiences, traveling, all of those things are important. And I'm not suggesting that you can't go straight into law school from undergrad. There's obviously lots of people that do that, but there are a lot of people that have different professional experiences before they go into law school.
That's it for the questions from those listening to us today. Andrea, I'll turn the time back to you. So.
Excellent. Tristan, I've just got one question for you in the few minutes we have left. And since you've talked about preparing for law school, you mentioned in the time when Dan and I and you were talking before we started the webinar that you minored in philosophy, and that you did that with the intention of doing well on the LSAT. One, do you feel it benefited you when you took the LSAT? And were there other skills from that minor that you feel were helpful as you moved through law school and through your career?
In terms of the LSAT, I'm not sure that it did. But I do think it has and continues to benefit me practicing, because the ability to most everything that you do as a lawyer, you have to look at it in terms of a legal test or standard. And so ability to examine an issue using deductive logic, and the ability to make to make assumptions or to rely on assumptions, or the ability to recognize that someone is relying upon a faulty assumption for their argument is crucial being a lawyer. So what you usually will see for most arguments, especially made by laymen, by clients, and for most lawyers, is that they're making an argument based upon a foundation that is faulty or a faulty assumption. And from that faulty assumption, they're trying to come to a conclusion, whatever that conclusion may be, to benefit their client or the client to benefit their position. And the philosophy course, the philosophy component teaches you that in order to logically examine the legal issue, you've got to see whether or not there's some assumption that's being made and whether or not that assumption is false, or whether or not you can logically conclude from that assumption a right or a wrong answer, or if there's ambiguity from that question that's being asked. And if there's ambiguity, then you have to decide based on the ambiguity whether one of the two options is true or false. And that's essentially what a lawyer does on a daily basis. That's what trial lawyers do, is they apply facts to establish law. And if the law isn't established, then they apply the facts to the two alternatives, whether it's X or Y. So to answer your question, the philosophy classes helped me, and they remain helping me because of what we do on a daily basis. And I see lawyers just all the time making decisions and making bad decisions based upon faulty assumptions and faulty facts that they've made, and not looking at things logically. And so that helps me a lot. Now, should it have helped me in the Lsat? I'm sure it should have. But I think more than anything, really repetitively taking those Lsat practice exams, I think is probably the best thing for folks in getting ready for that Lsat, is continuing to take those Lsat exams in the same climate as if you're taking the real exam, timed and under pressure, like you would for taking the real exam. So when you get in there, you're calm and relaxed and ready to take the exam. You're not nervous. You're not having anxiety. You know what you're going to see. You've seen it before, so you're ready to do it.
That's great advice. And just, we've only got about 2 minutes left, Tristan. Is there any other advice or any other final thoughts you have to share with students today?
I just wrote down a note. A lot of folks will ask me, there's obviously there are a lot of lawyers and people, there's a gluttony of lawyers around the country, and people will ask, how do you know what makes a good lawyer and a bad lawyer? How do you know if I'm hiring or finding a good lawyer? So I wrote down my thoughts on what makes a good lawyer. And for you, if you're deciding to go to law school, or if you're in law school or you're admitted to law school and you want to know, what do other lawyers think makes a good lawyer? What makes a good lawyer is a lawyer that is a superb writer. Writing is the most important component of being a lawyer, because that's what you do day in and day out. Communicating, and it's not the debate communication. It's that's one thing you learn practicing that you don't do in law school. It's real down home, ain't y'all communicating. It's communicating in colloquialisms, the way that people really understand. That's the communication I'm talking about. People need to know who you are, and they need to know that you're talking directly to them in their language, right? And then it's the intangibles, the emotional intelligence. That's really what makes for a good lawyer and lawyers that are successful.
Well, thank you. And that is a great note to end things on, and certainly helpful for our audience today, or for anyone who comes back Tristan to view this recording. So thank you so very much for taking some time to spend with us today. We appreciate hearing about your own experiences at Utah State, and appreciate too you being candid about the challenges that you yourself worked, to overcome to really find the success that you enjoy today. And we're appreciative to have alumni like you who are willing to come back and talk about their experiences to the benefit of our current students. So thank you so very much.
So you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And thank you, Dan, for being my co-host today. And I do just want to leave our attendees with a bit of information, which is if you're interested in connecting with us or with Tristan, you're welcome to reach out to me or Dan. We can put you in touch. And normally this is the slide where I would tell you about things that are coming up. But of course, this is our last installment of the pre-law series for spring semester 2021. So we encourage all of you to stay tuned for our fall offerings. But we hope that you have enjoyed the series this semester, and we hope that you're making the time to make connections with the alumni who come back to speak with us. And we thank our audience for joining us today. And with that, I will wish everyone a wonderful afternoon and wish everyone a wonderful semester. And we'll see you in the fall. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, bye, guys.